Today's case is one of those that is just so profoundly infuriating. It gets right under your skin and stays there. It's a story that perfectly illustrates what happens when unchecked power, obscene wealth, and a fragile male ego collide with a woman who simply and reasonably says no. We're going to the heart of 1990s New Delhi, India, a city in the middle of a massive transformation where old traditions were clashing with new money and a burgeoning party culture. It was a world of exclusive farmhouse parties on the city's outskirts where the elite could drink, dance, and operate by their own set of rules far from the prying eyes of the public. But on one particular night within one of these exclusive circles, a single gunshot would shatter the illusion of civility. A young woman's life would be brutally taken, not in a dark alley or a robbery gone wrong, but in a full view of over 100 of the city's most influential people. The killer was the son of one of the country's most powerful politicians, a man so insulated by his family's name and fortune that he believed he was completely untouchable, that he could murder someone in cold blood and simply walk away. And the most sickening part? For 7 long, agonizing years, it looked like he was right. This is the story of a senseless murder, a breathtakingly corrupt investigation that followed, and a court verdict so outrageously unjust that it forced an entire nation to rise up and scream with one collective voice, enough is enough. Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Zara, and on this channel, we dive into true crime stories. If you're as hooked on this stuff as I am, you've definitely landed in the right spot. To become part of our awesome community and catch new videos every single week, hit that subscribe button, guys. And seriously, a quick like would be huge for the channel. It helps more people discover these important stories. And feel free to share too. This case is crazy, and even a little share can make a big difference. And if you want to get even more involved with the channel, I'd love for you to think about becoming a channel member. Not only does it help keep things going, keep things running, but you also get instant access to our private Discord server. That's where the real talk really happens. We can dig deep into the cases I cover, brainstorm theories, and honestly just hang out and chat about anything. So if that sounds like your kind of vibe, just hit the join button below this video. Let's start with the woman at the center of our story, the vibrant and unforgettable Jessica Lal. Born on January 5th, 1965, Jessica was, by all accounts, a force of nature. She was raised in a close-knit, loving family and shared a particularly deep bond with her sister Sabrina. From a young age, Jessica was known for being vivacious, incredibly ambitious, and fiercely independent. She was the embodiment of the modern Indian woman who was emerging in the 90s, educated, confident, and determined to build a life for herself based on her own terms, not the terms dictated by society. Drawn by the promise of opportunity, she moved to the sprawling, chaotic metropolis of New Delhi. With her striking looks and an unshakable self-confidence, she quickly found success as a model, appearing in various print advertisements and walking the runway for a number of brands. She became a well-known and well-liked figure in Delhi's glittering and often tight-knit social scene. But Jessica was more than just a pretty face. She was a hard worker, a hustler in the best sense of the word. To earn extra money and stay connected to the social world she moved into, she began working as a part-time celebrity bartender. Now, this wasn't your average bartending gig. She would be hired for the most exclusive, high-profile private events and parties in the city. It was a role that required charm, professionalism, and the ability to navigate in a room full of powerful and often demanding people. She was good at it. At 34 years old, Jessica was single, focused on her career, and enjoying the independence she had worked so hard to achieve. She had no way of knowing that this side job, this entry into the world of glamour and excess, would place her directly in the path of a man who represented its darkest, most dangerous underbelly. Now let's turn our attention to the man who would so casually extinguish a life. Siddharth Vashishta, known to everyone as Manu Sharma. If Jessica's life was about self-made ambition, Manu Sharma's was the complete opposite. It was about the suffocating privilege of inherited power. He was born into a world that most people can't even imagine. His father was Vinod Sharma, a titan in Indian politics. He was a former union minister and a senior leader in the powerful Indian National Congress Party with immense influence in both Delhi and his home state of Haryana. The Sharma family was obscenely wealthy with a business empire built on sugar mills that generated billions, allowing them to live a life of unchecked luxury. Growing up in this bubble of extreme wealth and political immunity, Manu developed a reputation as the quintessential rich, spoiled brat. He was notorious for his explosive temper, his love for firearms, and a deep-seated, terrifying arrogance that came from a lifetime of never facing consequences for his own actions. Manu had several run-ins with the law, including reckless driving and many altercations at nightclubs, but all of these were resolved quietly and quickly thanks to his daddy's connections and wealth. He moved through life with this large group of friends who were from similarly powerful backgrounds. The two most prominent members of his crew on that fateful night were Amardeep Singh Gill, known as Tony, and Vikas Yadav, the son of another notorious politician, DP Yadav, a man often described as a crime boss with a political title. Does that ring a bell? We have covered a totally separate crime where Vikas was involved, the honor killing of Nitesh Katara. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check it out after today's case, as the two of them are kind of linked. This wasn't just a group of friends out for a good time. They were a pack. They moved with the swagger of men who genuinely believed that the rules of society, the laws of the land, and the basic tenets of human decency were for, lesser people. Their fathers' names were their armor, and their money was their weapon. They were, in every sense of the word, untouchable. The night that these two worlds, Jessica's world of hard-won independence and Manu's world of inherited impunity, collided was the intervening night of April 29th and 30th of 1999. To really understand the audacity of what happened next, you need to picture the setting. The event was held at the Kitab Colonnade, a stunningly chic, high-end lifestyle complex in the Merali area of South Delhi. It was built right next to the historic Kitab Minar, a 12th century UNESCO World Heritage Site. This location was symbolic, a place where Delhi's ancient history stood as a backdrop for the flashy, modern glamour of its new elite. The colonnade was a place to see and be seen, a beautifully designed space with colonnaded walkways that housed designer boutiques and some of the city's most exclusive restaurants. It was not a place for the general public. It was a playground for the rich. The owner of the Tamarind Court restaurant, Beena Ramani, was a prominent figure in New Delhi's high society. She was a successful and well-regarded fashion designer and socialite known for her charismatic personality and her influential circle of friends. Along with her husband, George, she owned the Tamarind Court restaurant and turned it into a chic and exclusive hub for the city's elite. She made a name for herself after her first divorce from her husband, Andy Ramani. She opened boutiques, exported garments, and entered the world of luxury hospitality. She opened many luxury restaurants where many huge celebrities and the who's who of India frequented. Her status meant that she was not someone who could be easily intimidated or dismissed, a fact that would become incredibly important as the case unfolded. On Thursday, 29th April 1999, Tamarind Court was the bar to be seen at. Every Thursday, Tamarind Court held a Thursday party where alcohol flowed freely and big names partied. There were fashion designers Rohit Bal and Reena Dhaka, art dealers Rohini Sharma and Ritu Walia, Neeraj Kanwar of Apollo Tires, and here's a name you may actually recognize, Steven Seagal. Yes, Steven Seagal was there that night. Now, for those of you that don't know Steven Seagal, I'm pretty sure he was like the actor in the 80s and 90s, and honestly, he has some good movies, okay? But the list went on. There were over 300 important people present. One thing to note was that since the restaurant was fairly new, I believe 6 months old, they didn't have a liquor license yet. Beena applied for one, it just wasn't granted yet. Yep. So technically the alcohol flowing that night and all the other nights was illegally served. However, there is always a loophole, and if the party is private, it's not illegal. So since Beena's husband was heading to Canada that week, this was his farewell party. All staff present that night were explicitly told to make it known that this was a private party. And these weren't your regular degular wait staff. No, they were the hottest, prettiest, best looking staff. Most of them were models, one of them being Jessica. So Jessica was actually friends with Beena's daughter Malini, and that's how she got the job that night. Jessica was wearing a white shirt tied up at the waist and denim shorts, pouring drinks all night for the 300 guests, along with Cheyenne Munshi, another up-and-coming actor and model. At around 11:15 p.m., Manu Sharma, Vikas Yadav, Tony Gill, and another friend named Alok Khanna made their entrance into the Tamarind Court. They were late, but they were high on their own importance and in the mood to keep drinking. Manu had been a regular at this place in the past, and tonight wasn't any different. He actually had plans to go on a train to Chandigarh with his mom, but he cancel those plans because, he wanted to party that night. The men had already met up earlier and had pre-drinks at Tony's house, and they just wanted to keep partying. 32-year-old Tony and 30-year-old Alok were regular young men working corporate jobs at the Coca-Cola bottling unit. They didn't come from wealthy families and were known to be pretty professional, nice guys. 24-year-old Manu and 25-year-old Vikas were very different, as we've discussed, both coming from wealthy families with no rules. By 2 a.m., the party was officially over. The last of the music had faded, the bar had been closed, and the staff, including Jessica and Cheyenne, were beginning to clean up. The bar actually closed at 12:30 a.m. or was supposed to close, but from my experience in India, even if the bar is closed, you can still hang around and finish your drinks. And technically, you shouldn't be able to order any more alcohol, but sometimes they let it slide. But in this case, the night was so busy, the bar completely ran out of alcohol by 12 a.m. People kept coming up to order more drinks, but were repeatedly sent away by bar staff, letting them know that the bar was now closed. So because of this, people began leaving the venue, but around 90 to 100 people still hung around. The 4 drunk men swaggered up to the bar where Jessica was standing. Manu, in his typical demanding tone, asked for 2 whiskeys. Jessica, calm and professional, simply informed him that the bar was closed for the night and that there was no more alcohol to serve. She had said the same thing to many people prior to Manu. It was a simple, polite, and completely reasonable statement of fact. But to Manu Sharma, this was not a simple refusal. It was a direct challenge to his authority, an insult to his very being. He couldn't comprehend that someone, especially a woman he viewed as a mere server, would deny him something he wanted. His aggression escalated instantly. He pulled out a thick wad of cash and slapped it on the counter. He offered Jessica 1,000 rupees, a huge sum for 2 drinks, fully believing that his money could bend any rule and buy any person. I did a quick Google search and it said that 1,000 rupees back then would be like 5,000 rupees now, which is wild considering that a pretty good whiskey now in like a good bar in India would cost you between 500 to 1,000 rupees, like maximum. So he was paying 5 times that. And like a regular whiskey would probably be 300 rupees. So it's a lot of money. But Jessica, however, was not the type to be intimidated or bought. She stood her ground and once again politely but firmly refused. She told him, "I won't give you a sip even if you give me $1,000. Manu then said, "Can I have a sip of you for $1,000? Jessica most likely had a look of disgust on her face, let's be real. And Jessica said no. This was the final straw. For Manu, this second refusal was an intolerable humiliation. In his warped, ego-driven world, this woman had disrespected him. His fragile sense of self, coddled by a lifetime of privilege, completely shattered. Consumed by a blinding rage, he did the unthinkable. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a .22 caliber Browning semi-automatic pistol to scare her. Someone close by yelled out, "Oh, it's just a toy," before Manu fired a single shot into the air. The sharp crack of the gunshot ripped through the quiet atmosphere, sending a wave of shock and terror through the few remaining guests. It was a raw display of power, a warning. But he wasn't finished. He asked Jessica once more for a drink. Jessica refused. Just seconds later, as Jessica stood there, likely frozen in stunned silence, he lowered the gun, aimed it directly at her head, and fired a second time. The second bullet struck Jessica squarely in her forehead. She collapsed instantly, falling behind the bar in a heap, her life extinguished in a moment of pathetic, masculine rage. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and scrambled for cover, and in the middle of this pandemonium, what did Manu and his friends do? They didn't check on the woman he had just shot. They didn't call for an ambulance. They didn't call the police. They simply turned around and walked out and fled into the night as casually as if they had just spilled a drink. A man named Rohit Bal and some staff rushed to Jessica's side. Some remaining guests called for an ambulance, and with the help of other guests, They carried her limp body to a Hong Kong businessman, Sanjay Mehtani's car, and sped towards Ashlok Hospital, blood everywhere. At this point, Bina located Manu and asked him why he shot Jessica, asked him where the gun was. Manu did not run away. He wasn't crying. He wasn't upset. He wasn't shocked. Manu simply said, "I haven't done anything." Manu was so confident that Bina thought she confronted the wrong man. Shortly after finally being admitted to a new hospital, the Apollo Hospital, 34-year-old Jessica Lal was pronounced dead. At that point, Vikas, Tony, and Alok drove to Tony's house in one car, and Manu arrived at Tony's house at 3 a.m. after disposing of his pistol in a random location. The four men immediately began plotting on how to get away with murder. Manu and his friends had fled to another friend's house, I believe his name was Amit, in Noida immediately after the murder. There, Vikas and Amit reportedly helped Manu dig up the pistol from a sand pile and clean the pistol with a cloth to wipe away any of his fingerprints. Manu then contacted a friend named Titu who was visiting from the US, and Titu was given the pistol to hide, and since Titu wasn't on the radar, he flew back home to the US safely. Their first instinct was not remorse, was not to help Jessica. It was to destroy any evidence. It's alleged that on the same night, staff were instructed by Bina Ramani to clean up Jessica's blood behind the bar. Staff also claimed she instructed them to deny that alcohol was sold at the private party. But Bina denies these accusations. Like many other of these cases we have covered, on paper, this should have been the most straightforward murder investigation in Delhi's history. A killer, a victim, a weapon, and over 100 eyewitnesses, many of whom were from the city's most prominent families. But what followed was not an investigation. It was a systematic and cynical campaign to suppress justice, orchestrated from the highest ranks of power. Manu immediately went on the run. While he was a fugitive, his father, Vinod Sharma, allegedly began to pull every string he could. He used his immense political network to pressure the Delhi police, allegedly arranging for the transfer of honest investigating officers and the installation of more cooperative ones. A massive cover-up machine swung into action. On May 4th, 1999, Alok and Tony were arrested. On May 8th, Bina, her husband George, and daughter Malini were arrested for running an illegal bar. Amit, Manu's fourth friend, was also arrested. After a week-long, highly publicized manhunt, Manu finally surrendered to the police in Chandigarh. It wasn't an act of conscience. It was a calculated move made once he had run out of places to hide. With the killer in custody, the focus shifted to the witnesses. And this is where the case descended into complete buffoonery. One by one, key eyewitnesses began to turn hostile. It was a parade of perjury fueled by a toxic cocktail of bribery and fear for what could happen to them. It's also claimed that Bina warned her staff about talking about what they saw that night, saying that these are dangerous gun-toting politicos. The most infamous of these was the star witness himself, Shine Munshi. As the person who was standing right next to Jessica and who had filed the initial police report, the FIR, his testimony was critical. In that first report, he clearly and unequivocally named Manu Sharma as the shooter. But when it was time for him to actually take the stand in court, his story did a complete 180-degree turn. He claimed, ridiculously, that he had a poor command of the Hindi language and he hadn't fully understood the police statement he had signed. He then presented this brand new, completely fabricated version of events, the two-gun theory. He testified that there were actually two men who had argued with Jessica and that both of them had pulled out guns. He suggested that the fatal shot had actually come from the second unknown man. It was a lie, so transparent it was insulting, but it was designed to do one thing: create reasonable doubt. And he wasn't alone. Karan Rajput, another key witness who had initially identified Manu, also recanted his statement. Dozens of other guests, the city's socialites, businessmen, and their children suddenly couldn't remember a thing. They were on the dance floor. They were in the bathroom. They were on the rooftop. They left early. The message from the Sharma and Yadav clans was brutally effective. Keep your mouth shut or else. However, in the midst of this moral cowardice, there were some, heroes. Bina Ramani, her daughter Malini, and her husband George showed incredible courage. Despite facing immense pressure and thinly veiled threats, their own businesses at risk, facing jail time themselves, they never wavered. In court, they stood tall and unequivocally identified Manu Sharma as the man who shot Jessica Lal. Their integrity stood in stark contrast to the sea of lies that surrounded them in the entire trial. The forensic evidence was also systematically sabotaged. Even the forensic ballistic experts recanted their evidence and changed their stories. The initial ballistics report confirmed that the bullets recovered from the scene were fired from Manu's pistol. But later, during the trial, a new ambiguous report was introduced, suggesting it was not a conclusive match. It was a classic tactic of creating forensic confusion to aid the defense. The case finally went to trial, and it dragged on for 7 excruciating years. The entire proceeding was a masterclass in how to manipulate the Indian justice system. The prosecution, its case gutted by the long list of hostile witnesses and compromised evidence, appeared weak and disorganized. The defense, on the other hand, was formidable. Led by one of India's most famous and expensive criminal lawyers, Ram Jethmalani, their strategy was simple but effective. They didn't try to prove Manu was innocent. Instead, they focused on proving that the police investigation was so hopelessly botched and the witness testimonies were so unreliable that a conviction was legally impossible. They attacked the credibility of the police, the tampered evidence, and the few witnesses who dared to speak the truth. Like I said, this went on for nearly 7 years. On February 21st, 2006, the verdict was delivered by Additional Sessions Judge S. L. Bayana. All 9 of the accused, including Manu Sharma, were acquitted. The judge stated that the police had failed to recover the murder weapon and that the prosecution's case was doubtful. The man who had shot a woman dead in a room full of people was declared not guilty and was free to walk out of the court. What? The nation erupted. The verdict was met with a tidal wave of public fury, disbelief, and a profound sense of shame. It was seen as the ultimate betrayal, a confirmation that in India, the powerful were truly above the law. Jessica's family was devastated. They were in shock, outraged, and felt betrayed by the justice system, that the system had completely failed them, succumbing to the power and influence of Manu Sharma's family. The verdict, which essentially stated that no one killed Jessica, despite a room full of witnesses, was a personal and a public insult. However, it did not break Jessica's sister Sabrina. She took her grief and anger and put it into fighting for her sister, vowing not to give up until her sister's killer was behind bars. She became a powerful voice, collaborating with media outlets and activists to fuel the public outcry that followed. But this is where the story takes its most remarkable turn. The people of India, pushed too far, decided they would not accept this. The media, which had followed the case for years, channeled this public anger into a powerful movement. News channels like NDTV and newspapers like the Times of India launched aggressive campaigns for justice. The headline from one newspaper, "No one killed Jessica," became a standard rallying cry, a sarcastic and poignant summary of the corrupt verdict. It wouldn't be unbelievable if the judge was paid off. This was a huge moment for civil society in India. Ordinary citizens, from students to professionals, organized candlelight vigils and silent protests at India Gate in the heart of Delhi. An SMS campaign was launched and hundreds of thousands of people texted their support and demanded that the government take action. The public became a de facto jury, essentially, and their verdict was unanimous. Manu Sharma was guilty. The pressure was immense, relentless, and it was directed squarely at the government and the judiciary. Also, side note, but it did end up helping the case, in 2006, Cheyenne's lies were exposed by a sting operation conducted by an undercover news show, Telika. So 2 journalists posing as casting agents of a big Hollywood project approached Cheyenne about being cast in a bilingual movie, but he had to be able to speak Hindi. In hidden camera footage, Cheyenne is asked to speak in Hindi so that the agents could test his fluency in the language. Cheyenne began having a full conversation in Hindi and even admitted he could read and write in Hindi and that he had learned it in school. A stark contrast to the trial where he claimed he did not understand Hindi well and the police statement he had signed. Cheyenne faced a lot of backlash for this, as you can imagine, and I don't think his career ever recovered. But this incredible public pressure worked. The government was forced to respond. In a rare and significant move, the Delhi High Court took suo motu cognizance of the case, meaning it decided to reopen the case on its own initiative, acknowledging the blatant miscarriage of justice. The case was put on a fast track. This time, the judicial attitude was completely different. The High Court judges were proactive and determined to uncover the truth that had been so deliberately buried. They meticulously re-examined the evidence, and their final judgment was scathing. They tore into the lower court's decision, calling it perverse and unsupportable in law. They systematically dismantled the two-gun theory, calling Cheyenne a liar and later charging him with perjury. They recognized the clear pattern of witness intimidation and gave full weight to the courageous and unwavering testimony of Bina Rahmani and her family. On December 18th, 2006, just 10 months after he had walked free, the Delhi High Court delivered its historic verdict. Manu Sharma was found guilty of the murder of Jessica Lal. He was sentenced to life in prison. Vikas Yadav and Tony Gill were also found guilty of destroying evidence and were sentenced to 4 years. A wave of relief and celebration swept across the country, as you can imagine. It felt like a victory for every ordinary person. Justice, it turned out, could be won. The conviction was later upheld by the Supreme Court of India in 2010, cementing the verdict. The legacy of the Jessica Lal case is immense and complex. It was a landmark moment that forever changed the relationship between the public, the media, and the justice system in India. The story was so powerful, it was immortalized in the 2011 Bollywood film No One Killed Jessica, which brought the fight for justice to an even wider audience. But the story didn't end with the conviction. Jessica's sister Sabrina Lal's life was consumed by this fight for nearly 2 decades. It was a long, lonely, and exhausting battle that took an immense personal toll on her. In 2018, she made a decision that stunned many. She forgave her sister's killer. In a letter to the prison authorities, she stated that she had no objection to his release. It wasn't about excusing his crime, it was about her own need for peace. She explained that she was tired of the anger and that she needed to let go of the burden she had carried for so long in order to live her own life. Sadly, Sabrina passed away in 2021 from organ failure. Their family perhaps took some relief in knowing that she was finally with Jessica. Even while in prison, Manu Sharma often found ways to bend the system, frequently obtaining controversial parole, which sparked public anger time and time again. Finally, following Sabrina's letter and a recommendation from a sentence review board, Manu was released from prison for good in June 2020 for satisfactory conduct after serving roughly 17 years in prison. Isn't that wild? He would have been about 44 years old. Manu was interviewed after his release, and he said that prison was so incredibly hard. One day, he was just a 23-year-old guy living his life, and next day, he was in prison with over 500 inmates facing incredible hardships. He said he was sorry for his actions and never intended any harm on anyone, and he apologized to Jessica's family. It's a complicated and, for many of us, very unsatisfying end to the story. But Jessica's legacy is not defined by her killer's fate. She is remembered as the woman whose senseless death ignited a revolution of consciousness. She was a vibrant, independent person whose life was stolen by an act of supreme arrogance. But in her death, she became a symbol of a nation's fight for its own soul, proving that while one man with a gun can take a life, the collective voice of millions demanding justice can and did change a country. Let me know what you guys think about this case. I found it so fascinating and so incredibly, in a way, motivating. The power of the people's movement is just incredible to me. Thanks for watching, guys. I can't wait to see what you have to say in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Bye.